Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So keep your conversation going. And then Kate Kendall will come up here and interrupt you and introduce the panels and get started. So thank you very much for attending this evening and actually getting here on time and getting your seats. So thanks.
Yeah, I know. This is my job. I know. See, being a grown up.
Is this going to be accessible to folks later too? Oh, great. Thanks for doing
So we're going to get started. My name is Kate Kendall. I'm Executive Director at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, based here in San Francisco. And I really appreciate you being here tonight with some very esteemed folks to try and make sense of what is a pretty complicated situation. And the complication arises for several reasons. One of the key reasons for the complication, as far as I'm concerned, is this is how complicated it is when you try to maintain inequality. It's kind of a mess. So if we fucked it up for them, that's fine with me. Because obviously this is a house of cards that at some point has to collapse and there has to be some coherence to it. And our presenters tonight will try and talk about and maintain that coherence. But even as we feel a bit frustrated about where we are and how far more we need to go, and that we aren't quite sure what we're supposed to do with all of this, you know, we can't help but recognize that sort of in the hierarchy of oppression, we're doing pretty good in California. And, you know, just a couple of weeks ago in North Carolina, for example, the Supreme Court there stopped second-parent adoptions so that lesbian or gay couples, same-sex couples, are no longer able to both be legal parents of their children. Now, there's no doubt that that is an outlier ruling and that the trend is very much in the opposite direction. But I will just say, regardless of the angst we're feeling about what the hell are we supposed to do on April 15th, which, let me just note, is my birthday. As much angst as we might feel about that, we are pretty lucky to have come as far as we have in California, to celebrate how far we've come, to feel a measure of security and safety. And while he's here, and because he is going to be leaving soon, I want to recognize an individual who, from my perspective, being on the front lines, doing this work for 15 years, it is very clear to me that without him, we wouldn't be where we are in California. Jeff Kors from Equality, California. Thank you, Jeff, for all of your work on all of our behalf. So tonight we have several organizations who helped present this evening, really important organizations that I hope you will think about and support if you're able to. BAILF, which is the Bay Area Lawyers for Individual Freedom, the LGBT lawyer group in the Bay Area, Equality California, the Gay Men's Chorus. Every time I see a Gay Men's Chorus concert, it makes me cry, love them. Horizons Foundation, obviously very serious community partner supporting us and all organizations in the Bay Area. Our Family Coalition, fabulous organization in San Francisco, our home here, the San Francisco LGBT Center. So our presenters tonight really are at the pantheon of individuals who are trying to make sense of a very complicated scheme that same-sex couples find themselves in. And we're lucky to live in the Bay Area where we have a large number of individuals who really are devoting their lives, their professional lives, to advocating on behalf of their LGBT clients in a way that tries to provide you the best advice possible in a situation where some questions, and this is hard for lawyers, and especially the lawyers on this panel, hard to be in a situation where you may not know the answer to some of these questions. And it's that not knowing that is so difficult to deal with. But we have four folks who are trying to make sense of it and trying to answer the questions at least as best we can. And when we don't have an absolute answer, at least give you some options. So the folks you're going to hear from tonight, and they'll be introduced in greater detail later, but I just want to make clear, these are individuals whom I have such tremendous respect for, and I am so grateful that they are there standing with NCLR and other organizations side by side on behalf of our entire community. Pat Cain, Deb Kinney, Chris Kollaja, and Karen Stogdill. So you'll hear from them tonight. I hope you'll get your questions answered, and if not exactly answered, at least have better information than when you walked in. And thank you so much for being here this evening. Pat?
is Pat Cain. I am a law professor at Santa Clara University. I moved here in 2007 from the University of Iowa, where I had been for 16 years, in order to get gay marriage. I like telling that story. My spouse, Jean Love, also a law professor, is here with me, and we did get married. And then, of course, we went back to visit in Iowa, where we are also married. So it turned out rather nicely for us. I've been working on these tax issues for a very long time. I've been teaching since 1974. I started at the University of Texas, so I understand community property, which is really helpful now that I'm in California. And there are many, many, many interesting questions. And truth is, we finally do have some answers. And that's really the good news. I'm going to give you a short introduction, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about the other panelists who will then come up and do a presentation, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. So I'll start, and then the second person up will be Karen Stogdill, and she is a tax return preparer par excellence. She and I have visited, we've been on panels together, we've visited about these issues a number of times, and I accuse her now of being a constructive lawyer. She thinks about this stuff so well. Next up will be Deb Kinney, who is actually a lawyer, and she knows a lot about community property and has been dealing with these issues. I've been on panels with her before as well, and shared many, many email correspondences with her. And then comes Chris Kollaja. I think I actually met you first at an ABA tax meeting in San Diego some years ago, where we did some panels on this issue, even back before 2007, before I actually moved to California. They are all experts, believe me, and they ask me hard questions, which just makes my life very, very interesting. Now, I'm going to tell you why it is. You know, actually, all of my law professor friends say tax is finally paving the way to equality. Because the IRS, by recognizing and dealing with these issues, is beginning to see how strange this all is. And I would never have thought that tax was going to lead the way to equality until I learned that Kate's birthday is on April 15th. Now I'm convinced that will be our savior. I'm going to tell you a story. In the beginning, and the beginning was 1913. That's when the modern income tax was enacted. In the beginning, there were no joint returns. A husband filed a return if he had income, and a wife filed a return if she had income. You could file joint returns, but you know, we have a progressive rate schedule. If you imagine the first amount of income is taxed at 10%, and then the second amount of income goes up to the next bracket, 20%. If a husband has income and a wife puts hers on top of it, she's paying way too much in taxes. So husbands and wives tended to file separate returns. There was only one rate schedule, and there were no joint returns. Then along came two key cases that were litigated in the 1920s. Both of them decided in 1930. The first one was Lucas v. Earl. Now, I'm not going to go off into great stuff here because, you know, you're not a law student class, but after you hear this, many of you are going to want to go to law school. Lucas v. Earl, Mr. and Mrs. Earl had an agreement that they would pool their income, that all of their property and all of their income would immediately be vested in each of them 50-50, equally. So they thought that Mr. Earl should report 50% of the income and Mrs. Earl should report the other 50%, splitting it so that they're both taxed down at the low bracket of 10% rather than having everything be taxed at the higher progressive rate. And the IRS said, no, you cannot by private agreement assign your income to someone else. That case went to the Supreme Court in 1930, and the Supreme Court held that's right. You cannot by private agreement assign your income to someone else. 6 months later, probably the most famous case in early tax history, Poe versus Seaborn, came to the Supreme Court. It involved a husband and wife in a community property state. Washington was that state. And they said, well, the state divides our income 50-50, and so we think Mr. Seaborn ought to report 50% of his income, and Mrs. Seaborn should report the other 50%, thereby getting that break